If you want to be more effective in your work and in your life, and you'd like to have more confidence that you're meeting your intentions, this is where it begins. Welcome to Do Busy Right, helping you organize your information and manage your attention so that they work for you, not against you. We educate you and encourage you by discussing ways to be more effective, not more exhausted. Let's do busy right. Hi there. In this episode, I'm going to argue that we need a new operating system. And when I say that, I mean we need one that is specifically dedicated to knowledge work. So I'm going to show you one. I'm going to point you to one that already exists. When we talk about ways to manage our information, the tech is really important, and I'll explain why. But the tech needs to be dealt with and managed through some sort of overall plan, and that's the operating system. Some tech is better than other tech, and we need to pick the ones that make sense. And we'll talk about all these sorts of things as we talk about the operating system. So when we think about an operating system, it's both a set of tools and some mapping of those tools to a process or flow. In other words, the tool is not separate from the process. The process says, okay, use this tool in these ways. Maybe not explicitly, but at least there's an indication there. And so there's some consistency to the tools that we use. And I think that's what we need in the knowledge work world. We have systems for other kinds of work, but we don't currently have operating systems for knowledge work. I think we're all just guessing about how to do what this thing is. And for the last 12 years, I've been developing Attention Compass to be that operating system for knowledge work. Now, I don't love all of our tech, but when I say we've got bad tech, I usually mean it's not been updated. It uses archaic metaphors. And I talk about metaphors if you're interested. I talk about these metaphors in a previous episode. It's episode 40. If you want to do more research about the metaphors and how that works in technology. But the existing metaphors really, because of their age, impede our ability to do what we want to do or what we need to do with the information that we use the tools for. They lock us into ways of thinking that are not as useful as they once were. While we're doing this, I'll also explore the relationship between attention and information because they're so tightly linked that all the tools that we utilize are information tools in nature. They're tools about our information, and that influences our attention. That's going to be important because the ways the current tool set, the existing tool set, fails us is that they don't let us work with information the way we should best work with information. They don't let us deal with information in its more useful, natural, meaningful ways. Now, this is an attention show. Attention Compass is my thing. This is Do Busy Right. That's all about attention. Our attention is absolutely critical. And I've talked about this previously, like in episode 57, where we talk about trying to manage time versus managing attention. And I'm very much about managing attention, let time take care of itself. So in this episode, I'm going to explain or interpret the relationship between attention and information. We want to manage our attention well, and the tools don't directly manage our attention, but they manage our information. And so we've got to relate these two things back together so that we understand how they best work together. And this will help us understand why our tools are not designed to manage information in the ways that best support our attention management. So tools help us manage information. Information is heavily related to how we manage our attention. And we're going to get all of that thought about in this podcast. So to start off, attention is critical, particularly in our modern society and in knowledge work. And I say that for two reasons. One is, first and foremost, I'll say, attention relates to how we direct our will. It relates to what we are doing at any given point in time. What's the work that we're doing? And I'll argue that the work that we're doing is the work that has our attention. And further, when we express our will to do something, our intent or our will to do a task, the thing that we utilize to do that, we put our attention on the task. And so that's an important thing. And if we don't control our attention, then we can't do work, particularly knowledge work. And I'll talk about why that's particularly true. But if we're distracted or interrupted, then we can't do work. And I've talked about this a lot of different ways, a lot of different places. The specific relationship between our wills and our work is actually pretty mystical. So I'm not going to try and dig too deep into that, but our wills direct what we're doing. And the things that we do by putting our attention on them. So our attention is important in that it is the means by which we do things. And that's the first one. So if you have a list of tasks to do, you complete that list of tasks by choosing to put your attention on these tasks and do the things required to complete the task. So the second piece here is our attention is how we engage with information. So when we look at knowledge work, we say for knowledge work, information is the input. Our brains are the factory, and information is the output. So in the knowledge work world, information is the input to our brains, which are the factory, and then other information is the output from that factory, our brain. But the way we engage with information is to use our attention. Just like the way we engage with a physical object is to look at it or hold it or touch it or taste it. And the way we engage with information is we put our attention on it. We can't comprehend information without giving it our attention. And whatever mystical thing that happens when this information gets into our brains, it can't happen without us paying attention to the information. You can't understand a story unless you pay attention to the printed words or the spoken words or the pictures on the screen. And so attention is the mechanism by which information is useful to us. Attention is also how we output information. We have to pay attention in order to create this new information, this product of the knowledge work process that's then going out and creating value. A knowledge work process at a fairly high level goes like this. We need to get information as our raw material. And so we give attention so that we can bring that information and get it somehow into our skulls. And then we utilize our attention, our focus on that situation to do the work of altering that information, of transmuting that information. And then we use our attention to encode the output of that process, which is also information. And when I say encode, I mean put it somewhere where it's not in our skulls, put it out somewhere in a more permanent form. And that's where the tools come into play, at the beginning and at the end, and sometimes in the middle. So in order to do knowledge work, this thinking about attention leads us to some things that we need to be able to do with information. And these are things that we need to be able to do very, very well. So the first thing we need to be able to do with information, and I say first, not in any sort of temporal sense, because the whole thing is cyclical. But somewhere in this process, we need to be able to find information, whether that's information that we've already captured in the sense that we have a copy stored somewhere that we own, or information that there's a copy stored out there, but we're not aware of its location, like we go search for it. So we need to be able to find information. Then we need to be able to utilize some medium to consume that information. And then leaving out that mystical step where the information actually begins to inhabit our brain, then on the output side, we need to be able to store it, which is related to the word I used before, encoding the resulting information. And that output needs to be tangible and realized in the world. So with these three things in mind, let's now take a look at the tools we've had. And I've said that the tools that we have are not well suited to the knowledge work task that we face. This is not just a complaint, okay? We don't understand this knowledge work task very well. We haven't studied it very precisely or very well. We haven't identified it cleanly previously to now. We're in a similar situation to the manufacturing work before Frederick Taylor came along and applied scientific management. We haven't broken down the process to the point where we understand its component parts. And this is knowledge work. Information, we talked about information. Information is where the tools live. And information is interesting in that we don't know of a way to identify the pure form of information. We've studied this, and information is a paradox in that it seemingly doesn't really exist until it's perceived. It's kind of a quantum thing, but we won't get into that level of detail here. But I think of it by saying information doesn't exist by itself, but exists in its encoding somehow. And again, if you think really hard about that, it gets really weird. But for now, let's just think about information being encoded, not in some sort of free form out there in the world. So there's always some sort of a representation of information. Now, for this, I think humans generally use the term media or medium for that representation of information. And it could be words printed on a page, words spoken in sound waves recorded, some sort of an audio transmission, could be pictures, but the information is in some sort of a medium and gets transmitted to us through that medium. Likewise, encoding means that the new information is embedded in some sort of medium. Now, it might be a lot of steps, it might be a few steps, but it's encoded in some sort of medium, and that is a technology. The medium and the surrounding tools for that medium are a technology, and that's where the tools enter into all this. So you can't write on a piece of paper by sheer mental effort. You have to have a pencil or a pen, or right? And once it's encoded, the information is out there in a medium in the physical world. Information exists in our skulls, but we have to have a tool to interact with the physical world so we can do the encoding and get it out of our skulls. And of course, again, that's where technology comes back in. It's via these tools. Tools and technology and media are all one thing in this sense. So tools do three things for us that sort of map to the three things I talked about before. Tools help us store information. And that means this information is encoded outside of our skulls in the real world. It's stored. The tools help us transmit information. And that means help us move it from one human to another. The transmission of information is also a little weird if you dig too deep in it, but it goes from one human, from one brain to another. And then the tools we use to consume information, to decode it from its encoded state and bring it into our minds, brains, skulls, into our attention. And our tools help us do that to some greater or less degree. So those three things. So our tools mediate our experience with our information. And in mediating that experience, the tool can help to a greater or lesser degree. We can envision better ways to code. Better meaning cheaper or faster, or whatever that is. So that's what I mean when I say mediate. Thus, if the tool is somehow mismatched to the information that we want to deal with, or to the way that we need to deal with the information, then that's going to produce some interference, some slowness or difficulty in the thing we're trying to do with the information. Encode, decode, comprehend. The tools are just tools, and they're the best we know how to make them. Technology always builds on itself, but that means that technology approaches an ideal state rather than typically appearing in an ideal state. And the world, of course, changes. So then our tools morph, we modify them, and they change over time. Now, we're in a place recently where our tools seem to be changing really rapidly. But as I've argued in other places, they're not changing in fundamental ways very rapidly at all. Meaning, email hasn't changed in 30 years, the way we interact with email, just as an example. But we keep getting new versions of email clients, which is really, but it hasn't changed fundamentally. But our tools are simply inventions, and over time, we're likely to invent better ones. And until that happens, we've got the ones we've got. I mean, very few of us are going to go invent the new tool, right? One really interesting thing about tools, and this is a little bit of an aside, one interesting thing about our tools is that our tools are sold to us, and that means there's a market for tools. That means there's at least, I'm going to say, a theoretical conflict between creating the best tool or creating the most sellable tool. And there's no reason to expect these two things would overlap 100%, despite what technology companies tell you. They are selling you the most sellable tool. And I'll give you an illustration. And the history of business has tons of stories like this, but this is just one. VHS versus Betamax in terms of video recording. Most technologists would say Betamax is a better technology, and that's what they were saying at the time. But for non-technology reasons, VHS won in the market. And so now we all have VHS tapes, and very few of us even remember what a Betamax is. So this is an example of the fact that the tools that are available to us are not automatically ideally suited to their purpose. Okay, marketability is one reason why. There may be others. We're still learning, for example, but there's no reason that we should expect that whatever tool is sold to us is the best of all possible tools. A second interesting thing about tools is tools have a context. They're developed to be used in certain ways, in certain environments with certain materials. And this is an area where I claim a good bit of expertise because of my background in information systems. What's a tool good for? If I look at a tool, what is the tool suited to do? What's the best tool for the job? I spent a lot of time and effort in understanding what tools are good for, particularly the informational kind of tools that we're discussing here. Building tools that are better suited to purposes, these engineering kinds of tasks. So let's take an example of a tool that is intended to store information. And like any other tool, this is an invented tool, and that's important. So let's talk about a SQL database, SQL. I won't get too geeky about this, but SQL is an invented structure for storing information. It has a particular design and it has particular features that were intended to produce particular outcomes. And it works with particular kinds of information, but not with all information. So SQL is an engineered tool that's based on some theoretical approach to information management that is more or less accurate. But it's a special purpose kind of tool. So an aside within the example, if you look at Frederick Taylor, one of the stories about Frederick Taylor, the father of scientific management, is that he matched the shovel to the kind of material that was going to be moved in order to make moving material more efficient. And the simple way to think about this is he developed big shovels for light, fluffy materials and smaller shovels for denser or heavier stuff, so that the act of shoveling sort of had the same heft or weight to it each time you moved a shovel full of material. Makes sense, right? So the tool works with the material. Okay, and I'm going to bring this back to SQL in just a second. But as an example, if you're going to drill a hole in metal, you need a different drill bit than if you're going to drill a hole in wood. Usually one or the other will serve both purposes, but to really be good at it and to get a good hole, you need to match the tool to the material. So back to SQL. Different tools have been developed to store particular kinds of information. Now, why is a question I won't get into, but they were specifically designed for specific kinds of information. So that's the context. And I'm going to say that the kind of information that we now need to store is not best stored in a SQL database. So you could say that SQL was not designed with the purpose of storing the kind of unstructured information that we really need to deal with. By the same token, when we look at our tools, our information storage options are fairly limited. SQL is one of those, but most people don't directly use SQL to store information. So there's a couple of different categories of data storage techniques, theories that are available to us, and we pretty much got to pick one, and it's just a handful. Now, SQL is SQL, and it stores data, but I'm probably the most commonly used tool to store information is the file storage system in PC and iOS computers. You're very familiar with it. It's this nested folder structure, and it's called a hierarchical data storage system. Now, it's not SQL, but like SQL, it's not the best tool for storing the kinds of unstructured information we need to store. I've talked about this in lots of other places, so I won't beat it to death here. But we've not really developed this unstructured data storage thing that we need. And it's pretty tricky from an informational perspective, so I won't go into detail there. But when we look at the kind of information we need to store, information we need to store as knowledge workers, there's multiple things that our information is about. And the folder structure that is the most common storage mechanism forces the information to be about one and only one thing. That's the way the structure works. And that's a real challenge. It's like trying to put a square peg in a round hole. It just doesn't fit. Now, can it be set there in some ways? Yes, it can be set there, but it's not going to work well. And so that's what we're trying to do is we're trying to put this unstructured information that we need into a structure, the folder system in PC and iOS computers that doesn't work. That's our tool for storing the information. So that's this challenge. So one of the ways we see it is to consider storing an information artifact in this folder structure. Let's say we're going to store an email. Somehow we've gotten a literal copy of an email and we're going to store it in our folder system. Now, think about how many different properties an email might have. For example, how many names are in the CC line? How many names are in the to line? What's it about? Who sent it? All of these different properties. And any of those properties could be what we need to use to find that email again. But there's a bunch of them, and we don't necessarily know which one we're going to need to use later. So hierarchical storage systems like the file system in PC and iOS computers are not built that way. They're built to work on one parameter really, and one parameter only. So we also see this problem when we store other artifacts. So say you built a spreadsheet or you've written an ebook. So as humans, we know a lot of information about the artifact that's not contained in the artifact itself. Okay? All of these different parameters, some of them, like in the email example, some of them are contained in the email itself. But other things about this artifact are not contained in the artifact itself. So if you take the spreadsheet example, if you built a spreadsheet, you know an awful lot about why the spreadsheet was built. You know an awful lot about what the spreadsheet does. Who is it for? What data needs to be put in it? All of these kinds of things that the spreadsheet itself doesn't contain or doesn't contain easily. All of this stuff is called metadata. And you may be familiar with the term, but that's the information about the artifact. Back to PC and iOS file storage, this folder structure. Our current file storage technology does not manage metadata well. So this is one of the features that we really need, is to manage that metadata. And if we were to go back and redesign our file storage system, we would design it with stronger metadata. Now, our file storage system was probably designed for efficiency in the sense of tight disk space and high speed. But before, we talked about the world changing and the environment changing. And our world has changed to a degree where space and speed are no longer the biggest constraints. We've got lots of space and lots of speed. So those aren't the big deals anymore. But our storage system hasn't changed. Currently, the primary constraint we face is we've got too much information. And our primary need then is better tools for finding the information that we need amongst this large pile of information. And we'll likely give up a little speed or a little space in order to make finding easier. So if we look at the storage in iOS and PC operating systems, there's really only one parameter that we can use, only one thing that we can manage to help us describe the metadata, and that is the file name. Okay, and if you think about how you store stuff kind of naturally, or I don't know, somebody showed you how to do this maybe one point when you were young, that's where we get these long cryptic file names, right? And the storage structure, the folder structure itself will tell you something potentially about the metadata, but it's very, very limited. And there's only so much we can tell ourselves there. And so it's interesting that you can see how hard it is to store metadata in this limited way. Okay. It's like trying to write a novel on a gum wrapper. It just doesn't fit in there. And legendarily, we get these file names that are, draft final, no really final, date, final, capital final. And we get these file names that we're trying to talk to ourselves and other people about this metadata, but it doesn't fit into the box we're trying to put it in. And so that's another example of how the system really doesn't help us manage that metadata. Now that's all about, storing things, and that storing is both on the production side and on the input side. It's on both output and input side. But when we're trying to produce information out into the world, that also seems to be a technology that's not quite what it needs to be. It seems to just be a little bit of a misfit. For example, the information that we typically produce is very unstructured. And that's particularly true when we're in the early stages of producing it. Now, the problem is our tools largely force us to decide things about that information that we're going to store before we can store it at all. And this is, again, is a property of these tools, of these storage systems that we use. An operating system really doesn't do much by itself. If we think about a computer operating system, what it does is it enables us to use things that we now call applications, which are more specific purpose kinds of tools. Okay. So I'm in the operating system, and when I'm producing information, when I've had a thought or an insight or something like that, I just need to get it out of my skull into the system. I just need to record it somewhere. Unfortunately, our modern operating systems really don't offer that capability. So before a computer will record what my thought is, I have to decide how I want to record it. So I have to decide whether it's a Word document or an Apple Note or a spreadsheet or a PowerPoint presentation or a web page or whatever. So that's a limitation in the output side that we face with our current tool set. Is we have to make all these decisions before we can store what is a very unstructured piece of information. Anytime we're trying to engineer something new, we want to look at the weaknesses of the current version. And we do this as instruction, as learning, so that we can try to think about ways to overcome those weaknesses. So this is not just me complaining about the tool set. This is me as an engineer and an information scientist studying the existing ecosystem and trying to understand where its weaknesses are so that we can focus on those weaknesses when we design a new system, and then we can try to overcome those weaknesses. So, two weaknesses that we've identified in this last few minutes right off the top. So one is the metadata problem. Our current systems don't store metadata well. And the other is, I'm going to call it the application limitation. And that's this output limitation where we have to decide the format of the data before we can begin to store it. And we've talked about both of those. So if we're looking into a new operating system, computer operating system or otherwise, we want to investigate taking care of those. That's what Attention Compass is. It's a knowledge work operating system. It's a tool set that has workflows around it so that we can handle our attention and information well. And it's both attention and information because of the way we showed how closely linked they are earlier. It's really hard to deal with one of them without dealing with the other. That's how tightly linked they are. And so we need to be doing both things at the same time. We need to be dealing with both attention and information at the same time. And that's the goal of the Attention Compass system, is to put us in a position where our information and our attention work together and don't conflict with each other. So again, set the scene with Attention Compass, and I'm assuming that you haven't utilized Attention Compass here. It's an operating system. It is not a tool. It's not something you download and start using. It's not an app. It's something that you learn. There are workflows that we learn and build habits around, and there is a tool, but that's only part of what's going on. But these things work together, workflows and tools, such that our information and attention are well managed because it's designed to do that. It's engineered to do that. I'm a knowledge worker. And since you're listening, you're probably a knowledge worker as well. So in order to do my work, I'm sitting at a desk with a computer on it. I'm not sure that has to be the case with knowledge workers, but it's almost universally true that knowledge workers work with computers. And that typically breaks down into either PCs or iOS devices. As a knowledge worker in a nominal 8-hour day, the attention compass as an operating system, the attention compass process is at the forefront of my mind for 90% of that time. Other times I'm using different things, and we can describe that in a minute. 90%, that's a big number, but it's not a guess. It's something I've measured. And here's how I measure. The tool for attention compass, so this tool is where we actually store information. The tool is platformed on Evernote. And I won't get into detail about that, but there's a specific way you need to use Evernote in order to make it useful with Attention Compass. So if you were to record my screen and play it back as a movie, 90% of what you would see would be me engaging with Evernote as part of Attention Compass. The active application of my computer is Evernote. And that's how fundamental this operating system is in my work. Other part of my time is different apps, Word, email, various things like that. And that's what I mean when I say operating system, is it's running in the background all the time, and different tools pop up and come and go, different special purpose things, but it's running in the background. The system is running in the background. Even when I'm in Zoom meetings, I have a note open to capture my thoughts and to-dos from the meeting. So I'm avoiding distraction, trying to open something, find my phone, find a piece of paper, but it's underlying the things that I'm doing. And that's why I'm calling it an operating system. The Attention Compass operating system has lots of features, but there are two that we've already talked about needing. So I'll mention them here. One I referred to as the application limitation. And to overcome this, I just want the computer to capture my idea as quickly as possible. And this ubiquitous capture feature is available out of the box for the Attention Compass system. We reduce distraction because of the way the system is built and the way we use it. So that distraction really is reduced, improved in two ways. One way is it happens less often. There's fewer distractions because of the operating system and how it works. And two is when a distraction does happen, it's easier to deal with and then get back to work. And we don't get completely derailed by the distraction. So that's the application limitation. With Attention Compass, I don't have to start a new thing in order to capture the information that I need to capture. I can capture with my mobile device just as well as I can capture with my desktop. And you can't say that about every capture technology. But the point there is that with the Attention Compass operating system running, then I can automatically capture this inspiration, these seeds of information that occur to me as I'm working. And I don't have to interrupt myself or distract myself to do it. The second thing is we use Evernote and I mentioned this, as our information storage and work management platform. And because of the way Evernote is built and the properties it has as a tool, we really have this amazing capacity to collect rich metadata about both the thoughts that we capture and the artifacts that we need to keep. So now we're addressing the metadata situation, the second part. Now, Dealing well with that kind of metadata helps us in at least two ways. One is it makes the artifact itself more useful and more likely to be easy to work on. So, metadata in this case might be go work on chapter 2 of the attached document. So, if we have that metadata, then we lose less time figuring out where we need to go to work on the artifact that we need to work on. Maybe you've had the experience of opening the artifact that you need to work on and spending 15 minutes scratching your head about, well, what should I do to it? Well, we can capture that metadata. Another way that strong metadata helps us is in finding the information artifact that we need to find. If I can say lots of things about the spreadsheet and search inside of those lots of things, I can better find what I need. If I can capture the author and the date and the purpose and what kind of math it uses for a spreadsheet, is it an accounting thing or is it an operations management thing? All of these kinds of metadata about that spreadsheet, then I'm much more likely to be able to find it when I need it. So with this metadata, we've improved our information artifact storage as well. So with the Attention Compass operating system, we're able to capture and store this unstructured information and categorize it and get metadata even within this unstructured style. So we don't have to think a lot about what structure we're going to use. And we're able to keep this metadata about the artifacts, about our files and about our spreadsheets and Word documents and PDFs and all the different things that we use. We're able to keep that metadata so they're easier to find. And once we find them, we know better what it is we're trying to do with them. We know better what their purpose is. So these are just two examples of how Attention Compass is an improved operating system for knowledge work. Now, features are great, and features are why we have tools. Tools have features, and that's why we adopt a particular tool, because we need the feature. But I want to make it clear, Attention Compass is an operating system, and it's a way to go about the knowledge work. Attention Compass manages the work of knowledge workers. So we think more closely about what kind of help you need in your day-to-day to manage your information and attention. We think about Attention Compass. That's what we're thinking about. What can help you in your knowledge work? We've alluded to this a couple of times. Information and attention have this symbiotic relationship. If you can't manage your information well, then you're not managing your attention well, and vice versa. Attention Compass combines both of those things and helps manage both of them because they really are, in some ways, two sides of the same coin. And that's what the Attention Compass offers to us. That's its purpose. So when I say, hey, you need to implement Attention Compass, what I mean is you should implement the operating system for how knowledge workers manage their attention and their information. Attention Compass is the operating system to Do Busy Right. If you want to do busy right, the way I define it, then Attention Compass is the operating system that helps you achieve that purpose. Now, when I say do busy right, what I mean is productivity with low stress and less panic. I mean, ways to get better at what you do to actually get better, ways to manage your attention. When I say manage it, I mean manage it as it relates to information artifacts and as it relates to input information for our jobs and as it relates to output information as a knowledge worker. Also, it helps you manage your information as it relates to your task list and your deadlines and your commitments. Again, this is this other feature of attention is how do we implement our will, our intent, attention. As I've said before, a to-do is just a particular kind of information. So managing our information well, since to-dos are a subset of that information, means we're managing our to-dos and our commitments well. And by managing them well, I mean they remind you of themselves. They don't interrupt you. They don't distract you. And further, they're really tightly associated with the information that you need to complete them. So your commitments and to-dos fold into the attention compass system because it's just another form of this relatively unstructured information that we need to manage in our life. And so that's how all of this this teaching, this podcast, all the episodes that I've done, this is how it all combines and works together when we think about our attention and our information. And we think about the symbiotic relationship that they have. And that works into our task list. And to some degree, it influences our time. What we're really about here is attention, information, tasks, and time. And we're trying to deal with all four of these things at once. And they're all related. And that's what I've explained here in this episode is the relationships between these things. We talked about the link between attention and information, how they're really two sides of one coin. Tasks are just a particular kind of information. And time, well, time's really the junior partner in this four-way relationship, at least in my mind. Because the only relationship that time has is that it takes time to apply your attention. I guess it may work both ways, but more clearly, recognize this. You can spend time without spending attention, but you cannot give attention without spending time. So to me, that indicates that attention is the fundamental thing. So let's make sure we're paying attention. Let's make sure that we're utilizing our attention the right way in this four-way conversation. Attention, information, tasks, and time. We talked about time, talked about attention, then the information. Attention with no information is pure meditation. It's keeping your mind blank. And that may be a valuable skill to have, but I'm not sure how productive it is. And then information with no attention is an unread book on your bookshelf. And pure meditation and an unread book on your bookshelf are normally not terribly productive. I mean, there may be things to have, but not high levels of productivity. Another way to look at this is if you're asleep or under anesthesia or something like that, then all the information that's in your skull might as well not be there. It might as well not exist. And the reason is because you can't put your attention on it. And of course, nobody else can either. You can't utilize all your learning and knowledge because your attention is not available to be applied. Well, the same thing is true as we go through our work days. The problem is that there's plenty of ways to not be applying your attention that have nothing to do with being asleep in your bed or being anesthetized in a hospital. There's plenty of ways to fritter your attention away. And we see a lot of them. You know, a big culprit is entertainment and amusement, social media. Big culprits for really not applying our attention. We're frittering it away. So managing these four things: attention, information, tasks, and time. And that's what the attention compass is. It's an operating system for managing these things well and managing them together. And when we've got these four things managed well, then I'd say we're doing busy right. And we'll have clarity, and we'll have calmness, and we'll have high productivity. We'll have high effectiveness in the world because we're not wasting our most valuable resources. And that's doing busy right. So I think this has clarified what I'm about and what I'm talking about in the podcast and in developing, coaching, teaching attention compass. And what I want is I want everybody to experience this calm, relaxed productivity that comes when we've managed these things, when we're letting our tools work for us. When we don't have the constant stress of misusing our brains for the wrong thing. And if you've listened to the podcast, you know what I'm talking about. Your brain is an idea factory. It is not a data storage system. Attention compass is the means of allowing your brain to do what it's good for and let the other tools do what they're good for. When we don't have the distractions of mismanaged tasks and commitments, when we're not worried about being able to find the things we need when we need them, when we've got all of these things dealt with, that's when this calm, relaxed productivity happens. If that sounds good to you, reach out. For more information and a longer description of the Attention Compass, I can point you to podcast episodes 22, 23, and 24. That's 2.5 hours, almost 3 hours of content. There's enough information there for you to get started doing the Attention Compass operating system. And I just want you to be able to do it. If you need my help to implement, I'm happy to help. Now, while you're out there on the website looking at the reviewing the episodes, the podcast episodes, connect with me. Just subscribe there on the site. Shoot me an email. Love to hear your thoughts and experiences in knowledge work, and love to hear your experiences of challenge and how can we fix those challenges so that we can be better and more productive knowledge workers. I'll leave it there for now. This is Larry Tribble, PhD. Thanks for taking some time to improve your task and information management on the Do Busy Right podcast. The show is dedicated to helping you think about how to get better at working. And we do this by improving your attention and your focus. I believe that your work is not just about your job, but about all the tasks that you do to turn yourself, your environment, and your relationships into what you want them to be. What we're really talking about here is the underpinnings of becoming who you want to be. The primary way I help people is through coaching the Attention Compass process. Attention Compass is 4 workflows and a tool set that support our information, task, and attention management. I help people with big goals to build habits that put them in a position to achieve. We do this by eliminating wasted time and wasted attention. If you'd like to know more, you can find me on LinkedIn or go to dobusyright.com for more information. Have a good week, more effective and less exhausted. Do Busy Right.